There's a magical moment in the gardener's year where, after the dreary bleakness of winter and a flurry of snowdrops, the world suddenly begins to turn yellow. It's late February or early March, depending on where you live, when the cheery faces of daffodils appear. Their arrival is the signal that early spring has arrived too. So as well as being a heartwarming sight, these blooms come with a loud message. Daffs herald that the days are getting warmer and longer. Nature, who's been gently revving her engine, is about to take her foot off the clutch. And once these chaps are out, the rest of the plant world will follow. During the next 4 weeks, this orchard will go from this to this. And as your garden will be changing just as fast, it's essential that you get on top of it now, else all will be lost. In other words, if you want a garden that looks good right through the year, now's not a good time to go on holiday. But don't worry, that's what this programme's for, to show you what to do and why. And this is where I'll show you our garden, which by the end of the winter programme last week was ready for action. So can you just rush out here now that there's a daff in sight? Well, no, actually, because you see, it's all about timing. After a relatively mild winter, when things were really going to show us an early spring, nature has suddenly stamped her foot, the snow's come down, the wind's bitter, and the garden's now locked in an icy grip. Nature has stamped her foot. There's not much you can do except stamp yours. It really was cold, -12 with the wind chill. At this temperature, nothing will grow, and anything green or flowering droops as the roots fight for water in the frozen ground. And water isn't the only problem. I was going to prune this buddleia, but it is so cold that if I do cut it back, frost could well enter the cuts and kill it back even further. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go indoors. Early spring is a notoriously stop, start, stop season for gardeners on our sceptred isles. So it's just a matter of patience, secretly knowing that in our unique climate, a warmer spell is never too far away. What you want is a day that feels like this. I'm down to one vest now, much, much milder, and the thermometer on the wall, 14 degrees, and it's been like this all week. You can feel stuff beginning to grow. It's what you expect of spring, so can you rush out with your secateurs now? Well, no, you want to give it a good coat of looking at. A bit of taking stock, finding out what's growing and what isn't. Because luckily for gardeners, plants start growing in a staggered manner, depending on the warmth they need as individuals, which gives us marginally more time to keep on top of them. So there's early perennials, fruit trees too, and grass is one of the first things to start growing. In fact, in a mild winter, it won't stop. It does mean that come the spring, you really need to keep on top of it. Ideally, get out here before it gets to 3 or 4 inches or so. Any longer, and you'll be wielding your shears first. What's important is that you don't cut off too much. It was about 3 inches high, this grass, and I've only taken off half that. There's still about 1.5 inches there. It still needs to feed through these leaves, so you must leave it some. As the season goes on, you can lower the blades, but do make sure there's always a good wodge of green leaves on top Don't cut down into that yellow. Then you can look for more signs of early growth. What I really need to find are plants that are just about to grow away, which if I don't tackle them now, will grow in a way I don't want them to grow, like this clematis. It's already quite a mess, but by pruning it correctly, now at the right time, I can stop these new shoots making it worse this year. And yes, I know pruning's scary. So last year, I planted up a test bed with matching pairs of clematis to show you what happens if you prune plants at the right time and what happens if you don't. So what can you do now, in early spring? With clematis, there are three major groups. The early flowers that bloom in spring, the mid-season flowers that bloom in early summer, sort of June-ish, and the late flowers that bloom from July onwards. And with these, you can cut them hard back. Because all late flowers grow quickly through the spring and bloom on what gardeners call young wood. So cut them back now, rather than leaving them woolly, like its twin, and by July you'll have something nicely shaped, rather than a rampant mess. With the mid-season flower, because it isn't as vigorous as the late flower, and nor has it got as much time to make stems before it comes into bloom, I don't want to cut that right hard back. It will give it too much ground to make up. So with this, it's sufficient just to cut it about halfway, to about 1 metre above ground level. Then the pruned one should grow back to a cheerful size with a nice shape and flowers, while the other one produces flowers too high up to enjoy. With the early flowers, if you prune them at this time of year, you're cutting off all the wood that's already got the flower buds in it, so you wouldn't get any flowers at all, except right at the bottom. You want proof? Poor thing. I really am sorry. I told them. I did. Will they listen? These stems are called old wood because they grew last year, in readiness for flowering now. Well, heartbreaking. And so it is. There's nothing to flower on the right-hand one, while the other is blooming merrily. So, back in the garden, surely it's easy now to tackle that late flowering clematis. The one thing you very quickly realise about gardening is that it's full of contradictions. Take this clematis here, it flowers in late summer. It's called Clematis orientalis, sometimes known as the orange peel clematis, because its yellow bells are really so thick and rubbery that they almost look like orange peel. I could cut this right the way down to the ground, but the problem is it flowers on young wood and old wood, and if I lost all this old wood, I'd lose a lot of flowers as well. And it's also, its natural habit is much rougher than your average clematis. So what I'm going to do is just thin out this disemboweled mattress a little bit. Then I get the best of both worlds. It's confusing, I know, but then that's gardening for you. But if you watch when your plants flower, you'll know what to do with them. And the best news is that this early, mid and late principle works for every shrub and climber in your garden. So let's try another. This is Buddleia, a late flowerer. So what can I do? Well, I can chop it back now and I know I'll still get flowers. It's also very vigorous. It grows about 4 or 5 feet a season. So if I chop off about that much of it now, it'll flower at about the same height again this year. That wasn't bad, was it? Phew. There is a downside to all this, though. As nature has taken a foot off the clutch and is pressing the accelerator with some force, There is a sense of urgency. You really will feel a need to get a move on. Not least because having redesigned the front garden last month, we've got new beds, and mid-March is the time to plant them so that they have a whole growing season ahead. But what'll work best here? Well, for a start, this garden's rather shady because the sun rises over there and it doesn't get over the house until well past noon. And the other thing is, we want to mask that house there with a tree somewhere here. It's also the view from a lot of front windows, so something that looked good now, while the weather's dodgy, would be ideal. Now, luckily, many spring plants are shade-loving woodlanders that flower early to catch the light before the trees come into leaf. But it's always good to find inspiration, and it can come from unexpected places. Behind this house, I'm promised a 45 by 45 foot garden on heavy clay soil, which has already got 3 mature silver birches in it, but apparently it's a wonderful spring garden. Oh wow, look at that. It's like looking at a little stitched tapestry, all intricate. Spring flowering bulbs and perennials tend to be low to the ground because they've not had much time to grow, so it's easy to get a carpet feel. This is carefully crafted though, with tiny dots of colour rather than great blocks. There are no jarring shapes either. There's no clipped lollipop of bay. All the foliage textures here are different, but they're subtle and they kind of blend together. It's very clever. The foliage is from the summer plants just poking through, and it acts as a perfect background and contrast for the spring colour. It's a garden of glorious little cameos. Because all these spring flowers, which are seemingly filling the garden, are quite short. And as they start to fade, the summer blooms between them will grow up and hide the embarrassment of the spring bloomers as they fade. There are no cooking daffodils here at 2 feet. They're shorter. They'll just quietly disappear as summer blooms come along. So the low bulbs and perennials of early spring can create a colourful carpet of interest. But what can you find that's maybe a little bigger, taller? Well, as the weather warms up, so too does the wealth of colour from trees and shrubs. And this garden's got a veritable treasury. It means, of course, that the biggest problem's choosing the right selection of spring plants to complement each other. So in our garden, I'm going to create some recipes using tall, middling and short plants that'll grow just about anywhere. What's my thinking here? Well, I'm doing my usual thing of working in triangles, you know, big tree, down to lower shrubs, and then down to that herbaceous perennial in the front there. What are they all? Well, this is an ornamental pear called Pyrus chanticleer. It doesn't have much in the way of fruit, but it has lovely white blossom, followed by fresh green leaves, and you even get some cracking autumn colour on it as well. Here, I've got a viburnum. This is Viburnum aurora. Pink buds that open to white flowers with the most fantastic scent. And over the other side, the good old common old garden flowering currant. Now that's sort of raspberry red, picking up on the red of the buds of the viburnum. And down in front and between the two of them, Virginia, elephant's ears. Some have pink flowers, this one's white. And you'll also get good autumn colour from those evergreen leaves. I think that'll do nicely for one. The added bonus is that the pear tree will hide that neighbouring house too. The next group has another small tree in first. It's a delicate combination, this one. White blossom of snowy mespilus, that's Amelanchier, down to pale green bells of stinking hellebore, and then a blue-flowered lungwort, or pulmonaria, blue and white, willow pattern. You'll get that blue and white feel from the Amelanchier when you look at its flowers against the sky. They don't last long, but they are spectacular. Hellebores are much more durable and varied. And so are pulmonarias, with flowers that can be anything from bright blue to rosy red, giving them the common name of soldiers and sailors. This sea of pots will create that lovely low tapestry feel in a matter of weeks. Epimedium versicolor sulphureum, the king of shade, flowering however gloomy its spot. Euphorbia amygdaloides purpurea, giving great contrast with its acid green flowers and crimson stems. And Brunnera macrophylla Jack Frost, pretty forget-me-not planted over there. Having lit the blue touch paper, all I need to do, apart from a bit of watering and weeding, is retire. Not a bad start, eh, for early spring? The rest of the garden's not looking bad either, dotted with flashes of narcissi. But if you've got more space, there are other ways to use them. If you plant as many as you can of one variety, naturalise them so they look as though they've been growing there forever, you will end up with an absolute sea of pointy bit of the bulb is called its nose. This is a single-nosed bulb. Now that will produce one flower. It's fat enough to do that. I know that. I'm fairly confident. But this bulb here has got a single nose and a little one at the side. It's unlikely that that bit of bulb there will produce a flower. This is likely to produce one flower and one little cluster of leaves, whereas this one here has got, if you look, two noses, and they're both quite fat, these bulbs. I reckon you get two flowers out of that. So out of all those three bulbs, that'll be the one for me. But I'll be absolutely honest with you. We'll plant them and see if I'm right. And back in our garden, I've got just the spot for them. Single-nosed bulbs at the end, single nose with a little bulb attached, and big double-nosed bulbs at this end. There we are. So let's see what they produce. I can tell you're impressed. Me and my high-tech laboratory conditions. There we are. Now, they'll all flower. It's just a case of which one will flower best. And will I give you the results straight away? No. This is the nearest gardening gets to a cliffhanger. I'm going to keep you guessing. And anyway, we've other things to do for a moment. Because while the rest of the garden's up to early spring speed, there's a new area on the other side of the house that we need to kick off. It started looking like this, a 90-foot lawn, unused and unloved, but oozing with potential for a new border. And after much spade work and a bit of head scratching, it's quite different. So what we've got is two really generous lumps that come out instead of having the whole border back against the hedge like a frightened rabbit. And the depth of bed gives me lots of opportunity for really quite exciting planting. What I want here is a mixed border with colour and interest that'll stretch from now into the autumn. First in are the tough big lads, the shrubs, with several roles to play. I'm trying to do two things here. One is to accentuate the bay by building it up with shrubs in the middle to sort of do a divider almost between these two sides. And the other is to mix up these coloured stemmed dogwoods. So often you see them all planted in one colour, which is dramatic, but you don't see the contrast between the pink one and the green one and the crimson one nearly so well as you do if you mix them all together. In fact, all of these shrubs are chosen to contrast with one another, and there are some corkers. This holly, Golden King, is the best variegated one around, I reckon, not least because it has berries too. And almost all these shrubs are a good size. But these plants here look ridiculously small. They'll grow, though, into really bright ground cover. This is a euonymus called Emerald and Gold. Just a hint of hyperbole there. It's green and yellow, but it is very bright. The funny thing about this little evergreen here is if you plant it against a wall, it will actually start to climb it. So few shrubs are as versatile as euonymus, Emerald and Gold. It is a bit of a jigsaw trying to imagine how they'll look as they grow, matching shape and size, but you can always move them, you know, if they're in the wrong place. I've left a few gaps in between my shrubs, quite deliberately. There's a long one down there, a little pocket down there, and some more around here, so that I can put border perennials and grasses in, just to ring the changes and bring colour and texture. So, will I be planting them now? I did say early spring was the best time. Well, what have you got soil like this? It's a bit like my granny's porridge. Clarty. Look, if I put those in there, they're just going to soak. Needs a bit of work. And that means masses of grit and well-rotted horse manure, but only when it's dried out. Quite a lot. So in the meantime... Now, it's a good job I'm an honest man. Otherwise, I might have been tempted to dig some of these up and swap them over. But let's see what really happened. My row of single-nosed bulbs that I said would produce 1 flower per bulb. Full marks, 1 flower per bulb. The second row that had 1 large bulb and a little smaller one attached, I said would probably produce 1 flower each plus a cluster of leaves. Well, the one at the very front has done just that. But the other 3 have produced 2 flowers apiece. They were obviously very good bulbs. The third row, which were double-nosed bulbs, I said would probably produce 2 flowers each. And indeed they have, all bar that one there, which has just produced 1. So what this experiment does prove is that multi-nosed bulbs will always produce more flowers than those with just 1 nose. Thank you. I've got one more bulby trick up my sleeve. It's under this tree over here. Because daffs aren't the only option for naturalising for colour now, crocuses will pop up from late February. There are snake's head fritillaries too, with their delicate checkered bells. And that's not all. If you've got a big tree like this, which will have an equally large root system, then you'll find daffodils won't grow underneath it. But wood anemones and these bright blue squills, scillas, will. They've got shallow root systems and they don't mind the shade that'll come out from this leaf canopy in a few weeks' time. Smashing, isn't it? They're good for a long run of colour too. The scillas will appear in March and the anemones will run on well into April. Late spring, which just so happens to be where we're heading next. In an ideal world, what you're aiming for by the end of early spring is a garden that's in hand. You've pruned what needs pruning, you've planted the odd new bed or border, and you're in charge just for now. Just for now. Next time, late spring brings blossom, massive growth in the garden, and tulips.